Two wounds, same location, same weapon, same angle. In forensic science, that pattern has one name: homicide. The skull is 430,000 years old. Northern Spain, a mountain range most people have never heard of. Inside it, a cave system called Atapuerca, and buried inside that, a vertical shaft dropping 15 meters straight down through solid limestone. In 1976, paleontologists went down there with ropes. What they found at the bottom didn't just rewrite the history of human violence. It rewrote the history of what it means to be human at all. Bones. Hundreds of them. Piled at the bottom of a pit so narrow, you have to crawl just to reach the entrance. The team started cataloging. 10 individuals, then 15, then 20. The count kept climbing with every layer of sediment they cleared. Final number, at least 28 separate people, all the same species, all Homo heidelbergensis, a direct human ancestor that walked this earth long before our own species existed. They named the site the Sima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. And the more researchers looked at it, the less sense it made. Here's your first problem as a detective. This pit has no reason to exist as a death site. It's not near water, not near a food source, not near any sleeping area or shelter that would explain regular hominid activity. The only way to reach it is through a narrow crawl space connecting to a larger cave network, then a sheer 15-meter vertical drop. There is no ecological explanation, none, for why 28 individuals from the same species would end up at the bottom of this specific shaft, which means someone made a choice. That was the first puzzle. Researchers sat with it for years. Then they started examining the individual bones in detail. And the second puzzle arrived, and it was worse. One skull, labeled Cranium 17. It belonged to a young adult, probably late teens or early 20s. You can tell from the development of the teeth and the density of the bone itself. The skull was largely intact, which at that age is remarkable, and on the frontal bone, the forehead, there were 2 penetrating fractures, same size, same shape, same angle of entry. Dr. Nohemi Sala and her team at the Complutense University of Madrid spent years on these wounds. They examined the geometry of each fracture individually. They compared the entry profiles. They modeled the angle and force required to produce both injuries. The conclusion was not complicated. Both fractures came from the same weapon, delivered at the same spot, in rapid succession. Forensic pathologists have a term for that, a patterned injury. And patterned injuries don't happen by accident. They don't happen in falls. They don't happen through decay. They don't happen through scavenging. Patterned injuries happen when someone makes a decision to hit the same spot twice. The weapon was never recovered, but forensic analysis doesn't need the weapon. It needs the wound. From the shape of the entry point, the depth of the fractures, the angle of penetration, researchers narrowed it down. A pointed hand axe, a spear tip, something with a narrow, hard edge, something held in a hand, something swung with intention, twice. Now here's what sealed it. Here's the part that removed almost every alternative explanation from the table. No carnivore tooth marks anywhere on the bones. This matters more than it might sound. When a body is left in a landscape shared with wolves, bears, hyenas, and the large predatory cats that roamed Europe 500,000 years ago, they find it. They always find it. And when they do, they leave evidence that is unmistakable. Gnaw marks on the long bones, puncture wounds from canine teeth, drag scratches where a carcass was pulled across rock. The Sima bones had none of it, not on a single individual, across 28 sets of remains. No flood markers either. When water carries bones into a confined space, it produces a signature, sediment sorted by size and weight, foreign material washed in from the surrounding landscape, directional patterns left by current flow. Researchers found none of that in the Sima. The deposit was clean, contained. The bones were essentially where someone left them. So, here is what you have. 28 individuals, same species, one location with no practical purpose, no evidence of predation, no evidence of flooding, no evidence of any natural process that puts that many bodies in that specific shaft. And one of them with 2 deliberate blows to the forehead. You do not need a forensics degree to follow that logic to its conclusion. The researchers' conclusion was this: at least one individual was killed, murdered, and then the bodies, across some period of time, were brought to the shaft and deposited there. Now, the killing is almost the less remarkable part of that sentence. It's the depositing that stops you cold. Think about what that actually requires. You have to move the body. You have to carry it or drag it through a cave system, through a narrow crawl space, to the edge of a vertical shaft, and then put it in. That is not a survival behavior. It burns energy. It takes time. It serves no immediate practical purpose. It only makes sense if the people doing it believed, in some way we cannot fully access, that where the body ended up mattered. That is not what animals do with their dead. That is something categorically different. We cannot say it was grief. We cannot say it was ritual in the way we understand ritual. The bones don't preserve emotional states, but here is what they do tell us clearly. Those people made a deliberate decision about what to do with their dead, and then they executed that decision repeatedly across 28 individuals.
In this space.
The oldest accepted evidence of intentional burial before the Sima came from Neanderthal sites, roughly 100,000 years ago. Scientists had pushed back against even that for years before reaching consensus. The Sima pushes deliberate body deposition back more than 4 times further. 4 times. 500,000 years ago, something that was not yet human was already behaving in ways that we recognize as distinctly human. That should make you stop and reconsider almost everything you thought you knew about where our most fundamental behaviors come from. Now, the skeptics exist, and they deserve a direct answer. Some researchers argue the bodies could have accumulated naturally across a long period, that the shaft was essentially a trap, that individuals fell in over many generations, that the concentration is coincidence, that we are pattern matching onto a random deposit. It sounds reasonable until you run it against the actual evidence. No scavenger marks across 28 individuals is not coincidence. It is a pattern that actively requires explanation. No flood signature in a limestone cave system that should show clear water intrusion history is not coincidence. A deposit composed almost exclusively of hominid remains, with virtually no other fauna represented. That is not coincidence either. The natural accumulation hypothesis requires too many simultaneous coincidences to survive serious scrutiny. Others challenge the homicide determination specifically. 2 wounds, they argue, is a thin evidentiary basis, and that challenge is worth taking seriously. But here is why it doesn't hold. Forensic methodology does not require certainty. It requires the most defensible reading of available evidence. A patterned injury at an anatomically lethal location, on a skull showing no other trauma, with no competing cause of death present, meets the standard threshold for homicide as the most probable determination. That is how it would be classified in a modern case. The same logic applied to the same evidence produces the same result. 2 wounds is enough. Because those two wounds describe an act that accidents cannot replicate. Here is what the Sima de los Huesos actually is. Underneath all the analysis, it is the earliest evidence we have that death meant something. 500,000 years ago, before Homo sapiens existed, before language as we understand it, before agriculture, before writing, before any institution or structure we would recognize as civilization, there were beings who looked at their dead and could not simply walk away, who carried them somewhere, who, for reasons permanently beyond our recovery, decided that where the body ended up was not a trivial question. The violence was already there. It was ancient. It was deliberate. And so was whatever came after it. Both things existed in that pit at the same time. Someone killed a young person, late teens, early 20s, a whole life ahead of them by any reasonable measure, with 2 calculated blows to the head. And then someone brought the body to the Sima, along with 27 others, over what may have been years or generations. We do not know if they mourned. We do not know if they feared the dead, or honored them, or simply needed them gone. We do not know if the killer and the mourner were the same person, or the same group, or strangers separated by decades. What we know is that neither impulse is new, neither the violence nor the response to it. Both are older than our species. Both were already written into whatever we were before we became what we are now. We inherited both. The pit of bones is not just the oldest murder scene on Earth. It is the oldest evidence that death created an obligation, that something in our ancestors looked at a body and felt or believed or feared that what happened next was not nothing. 430,000 years later, we are still trying to figure out what to do with our dead. And we are still killing each other, both things, unchanged, since the very beginning. You just did what took researchers decades to piece together. You looked at the evidence, you followed the logic, you reached the verdict. If you want to keep doing it, more prehistoric sites, more cold cases from deep history, more moments where science collides with the ancient world, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video drops soon and you do not want to come in late on that one. One more thing. If this video made you think differently about where human behavior actually starts, share it with someone. Not because I asked, but because this story deserves to be heard by more than one person in your circle. The pit of bones waited 430,000 years to be understood. It can wait another 30 seconds while you hit the button.